I'd very much like to now invite Isaac to introduce our international speakers for our first session and discussion. Thank you, Isaac.
Sorry, good morning, everybody. To start off, we'd first like to invite Eric Holt-Jimenez to the stand, please.
Thank you.
Hi, morning, Eric. Initially, can you please just tell us your name, your qualifications, and where you're from?
My name's Eric Holt-Jimenez. I'm the Executive Director of the Institute for Food and Development Policy, otherwise known as Food First, from Oakland, California.
Thank you, Eric. Can you please tell us, Eric, from your experience, what has been the impacts of industrial-scale agriculture globally?
Thank you. First, I'd just like to thank this tribunal for the opportunity to present. There are many people who could provide the information that I'm going to share with you today, and it's an honor and a challenge to be able to speak before you. We hear from the United Nations that 1 in 7 people are going hungry on the earth today. And we also hear that in order to meet the challenge of hunger, that we're going to have to double food production by 2050, when we have an estimated 10 billion people, if we're going to avoid mass starvation. And we also hear that the way to do this is going to be through an intensification of industrial agriculture, which is said to be the most efficient and highest producing form of agriculture on the planet. Food First has been looking at this issue of hunger and production for over 40 years. So I just want to say that 42 years ago, Frances Moore Lappé wrote a book called Diet for a Small Planet. And in that book, she noticed there were 1 in 7 people were going hungry around the world. At that time, there were 650 million hungry people in the world. And we were told at the time that we had to double food production or we were all going to starve. And that the best way to do that was with the emerging technologies of industrial agriculture known as the Green Revolution. There's the fertilizers, the pesticides, and the hybrid seeds, along with irrigation and big farm machinery. But when we looked into it, she saw that, in fact, yes, 1 in 7 people were going hungry, but that the world was producing 1.5 times more than enough food to feed every man, woman, and child on the planet. And she also found that we were eating much too high on the food chain, and that the way that the food was being produced was creating massive ecological, environmental destruction. No matter, the Green Revolution was financed by the banks on Wall Street and Bond Street. Experts were trained and sent around the world. Money was loaned to third world countries to adopt Green Revolution technologies in order to save the world from hunger. The same thing happened in the United States and in first world countries. Farmers were provided very cheap loans to be able to buy these new technologies, to upgrade their technologies, and to double their production because the world was starving. You can imagine what happened. Everyone began to produce a lot more food. And we began to see the massive destruction of rainforests and massive displacement of traditional peoples, of peasant farmers, small farmers, family farmers. They were pushed out through industrial practices. Millions of farmers were driven off the land and into the ranks of the hungry. Because the fact is that people were not going hungry because there wasn't enough food. People were going hungry because they couldn't afford the food which was being produced. It's poverty that produces hunger, not scarcity. We haven't had scarcity in over half a century. So if we fast forward 50 years, what's been the result of the expansion of the Green Revolution and industrial agriculture? The Global South, which used to produce $11 billion in exports of food, now imports over $1 billion in food. They've become dependent upon the Global North for their food. The agrobiodiversity has been destroyed. Up to 75% of the diversity of our seeds and cultivars has been lost. Industrial agriculture today uses up 80% of the world's fresh water. And it produces, if you include the entire industrial food system, it produces up to 40% of the world's greenhouse gases. We have massive algal blooms and fish kills around the world. We have the contamination and the drawdown of ancient aquifers. And we have the displacement of millions upon millions of traditional peoples and peasant peoples around the world. So today, again, we have 1 person in 7 on this planet going hungry. And we are producing 1.5 times more than enough food to feed every man, woman, and child on the planet. So we've gotten nowhere. In fact, the Green Revolution and the proposed developments of agriculture to feed the burgeoning population today are simply more of the same. In other words, the new programs for sustainable intensification, it's really just about maintaining what is essentially a capitalist, industrious form of agriculture and tweaking it to make it a bit greener. This does nothing to alleviate the problems of displacement and does nothing to alleviate the problems of hunger, because it does nothing to alleviate the problem of poverty. The good news is that people have been pushing back for over half a century. Peasant communities, indigenous communities, women have been taking back the food system. And I want to especially note the role of women, because while industrial agriculture claims to feed the world, in fact, only about 25 to 30% of the world is fed through industrial agriculture. 70% of the world's population is fed by women, poor peasant women. Women feed the world, and women are the hungriest people in the world. Women and girls make up 70% of the world's hungry. Most of them are food producers. So if we want to stop the environmental destruction from industrial agriculture, if we truly want to end hunger, we've got to end poverty, and we have to redistribute the resources, which are the food-producing resources, which are concentrating into the hands of the great monopolies, in which farms are getting bigger and bigger, and family farms are disappearing, and we have the mini farms, which are not economically viable, in which people are locked into poverty even as they feed us. The social movements around the world, Via Campesina, the World March of Women, the indigenous movements for against climate change and for indigenous rights are coming together as we speak in order to ensure the rights of indigenous people, of rural people, roll back the Green Revolution, roll back the industrialization and capitalization of our food system to build sustainable, healthy, locally based food systems that can feed the world equitably. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eric. I was wondering if the panel might have some questions for Eric.
I only have a very quick one. Eric, is the number you said only 25% of the world's population is actually fed by industrial scale agriculture, like the factory farming? Is that the number, 25%?
25 to 30%, only 15% of food even crosses borders. In other words, the global economy of food only has 15% of the world's food. The rest is produced and consumed, at least nationally, if not locally.
Thank you. We will only be asking 1 or 2 questions each speaker because of the time, but Ross, yep.
Yeah, Eric, you mentioned consumption. Do you have any data or statistics in relation to waste from agricultural?
Thank you for the question. The industrial food system overproduces food and has been for over half a century. And as a result, 40% of the world's food is wasted. We have to be careful when we think about food waste, because there's the idea that if we just repurpose the waste at the consumption end, that we can feed the world with the amount of food which is being wasted. Remember that people are hungry because they've been displaced and they're poor and they can't buy the food which is being produced. If we're really concerned about food waste, we have to address a system which overproduces, and that would be the capitalist food system. Capitalism overproduces everything. Food is no exception. So we need to reimagine and repurpose the food system itself if we want to end food waste, poverty, and hunger.
Thank you. Thank you.